What's up? Happy Thursday. Today I'm going to be doing one of my last videos really focusing on Minerva because I'm going to be talking about the 5 things I learned from living in Taipei. This is part of a series that I've done this sort of video about all of the Minerva cities. You can check out that playlist if you want. So today is about Taiwan, but it's going to be a little bit different because I was actually only in Taiwan for 2 months due to the whole situation, but I didn't want to make this video about the pandemic. I wanted it to still be about Taiwan. So I'm going to do the 5 things that I generally found interesting about Taiwan during the time that I was there. They might be a little less deep because usually my deep realizations happen between month 3 and 4 of being in a place, but I'm still glad that I was there for the time that I was. And then we'll do a little bonus round of sort of Taiwan's response to the pandemic and how that sort of affects my perception of the culture there. So, thing number 1, graffiti culture is very different in Asia, or at least in Taiwan, but in a very cool way. So I've talked about graffiti before on this channel, and I'm really fascinated with like the culture of graffiti, like amongst people who do it, as well as like our entire cultures regarding of graffiti. I did most of my history assignments on it, but so we went to a chat with a graffiti artist in Taiwan, and it was really interesting because it seems like a lot of the criminal stigma around graffiti isn't as strong in Taiwan as it is, especially in the US, but even in like Europe. They actually had like a decent amount of designated spaces for graffiti to be painted without any sort of criminal repercussions. The guy was telling us about how every few months, I think every 4 months, 6 months maybe, the city will like go and white out those walls, and then it's like fresh space to throw up new things. And so a lot of the time they'll organize these like little like challenges almost, where it's like use just these colors, or use just one color, or use like the specific theme, and a whole bunch of people will throw up pieces on the blank wall around some sort of prompt, and like within like a certain amount of hours, I don't know, 8 hours, 6 hours, I don't know how long it takes to do a big piece, but I thought it was really cool how it almost seemed more legitimated. And also he was telling us that if you as a foreigner got caught doing graffiti in the streets somewhere you shouldn't, it was really likely that you would literally just get like a slap on the wrist, like, oh, don't do that again. No more. And they wouldn't like give you a ticket, no information, nothing formal. Mainly he was telling us because people are very nervous about foreigners that only speak English to them. So it's a weird kind of privilege thing, but I think it's also just wacky that they must be pretty lax in general if that's how they're willing to treat foreigners. And I just thought it was really interesting to think about how like it's probably because they don't have the history of like how in the US graffiti was associated with like people who weren't white, so poor people, black people, Latino people, and because of that the sort of treatment of it I think was made a lot worse because of the groups that it was associated with and their worse position within society. But that didn't happen in Taiwan, at least, so they have a totally different concept of it from my impression. Number 2, this is kind of the obvious one. Taiwan is a very interesting place to think about national identity and sort of why it matters, because Taiwan's nation is contested. China says that Taiwan belongs to China, it's a part of China, and Taiwan, or at least some people in Taiwan, because some people agree, some people want Taiwan to be a part of China, but I think the larger portion, based on like who they elected as a president this year, believes that Taiwan should be and is its own nation, and that has like political implications, economic implications, and like cultural implications. And I found it quite interesting to think of those cultural implications because I think a lot of the focus is on the politics and economics of like Taiwan not wanting to be under China's Communist Party, Taiwan kind of siding with like a pro-US stance in the international political landscape. But I think it's also interesting to think about just like people in Taiwan wanting to have control over what it means to be Taiwanese and distinguishing that from being Chinese. And that's where some of the tension within the people comes in, because part of that is about people who literally are not, at least any time recently, descended from the Chinese. So I don't know how much of a history lesson we need to do, but basically when the Chinese Communist Party took over China, mainland China, in like the late 1940s, the opposing army basically ran away to Taiwan, and they sort of imposed themselves upon Taiwan. And Taiwan has, even before that, a long history of being basically like invaded and conquered by a lot of different empires. Like the Japanese had a significant presence in Taiwan in an oppressive way for a long time. I think there had been that sort of presence with the Chinese even further in the past, but I'm not positive. But because of how those Chinese people treated them, a lot of people have an aversion to the Chinese that were there already. But the amount of people that came over there and still feel that they are Chinese and they are the correct Chinese is also a population on Taiwan. And so there's this tension of like some people want Taiwan to be a part of and be able to represent China, and that China is kind of conflicted because originally that was the China that was not communist, but now some of them are supportive of being a part of the China that is still sort of communist. But then a lot of the people that have like deeper roots in Taiwan really don't want to because they see it as just another conquering. It's a very complicated thing. So it's like a lot of people who are Taiwanese want that to be an identity that has its own meaning and that isn't just sub-Chinese, which I think makes sense. I think we can all sort of empathize with that. Moving into what being Taiwanese really is, and hopefully not contradicting my last point too much, is third, I found it really interesting how a lot of the temples in Taiwan are actually not belonging to a single distinct, like, religion, but are more of a mixing of a couple of different other larger religions. I think this mixing has its own name, but I think just the fact that it pulls from different things like Buddhism and Confucianist ideas and what's the other one? Tao? I sound stupid. But anyways, I don't know that much about Eastern Asian religions, any Asian religions, but basically a lot of the temples in Taiwan will have deities or figures that come from more than one of these different, like, established belief systems. And I just think it's so cool that it's like, we believe in anything and everything, and we just want to have some sort of spirituality, and it doesn't have to be like some strict like this is the only thing and this is the truth and this is the real thing and it's only that. And I really like the sort of like openness that I felt like in that they did embrace a lot of different belief systems. And also just going to temples in general was very interesting and very cool, and I thought it was interesting to experience going to a temple and going through the like sort of motions of doing the praying, I guess, or like asking for blessings is how it felt more so to me. It was interesting to do that and feel like it wasn't just like an appeal to a higher figure, but also like the act of doing that and like focusing on what it is that you need right now and what you think it's important to ask for can like bring a lot of clarity to yourself. And it can also be like, by doing this, I'm like telling myself that this is something that's going to happen. This is something that I am trying to make happen. So it can also just be a way of like the whole like manifestation being more of like a spiritual act. So yeah, temples in Taiwan, highly recommend. 4, we were very lucky in Taiwan to actually get to meet and have dinner with a family, which was a unique experience because we haven't really been like welcomed into a local home in the same way like within our first week in any of the other cities. I'm not saying like nobody had those experiences, but it wasn't quite as much the norm. And I just thought it was so cool to see how welcoming people were and how they were like very kind and very curious and also like, yeah, just like super nice to foreigners being in their houses. Obviously, this is a self-selecting sample of people that hosted us. But also, it made me think a lot more seriously about how the norm in Asia is to take off your shoes before you enter your home. So even when we went to this apartment complex, basically out in the landings, so there was like a staircase going up and like a couple apartments, the landings were just like full of shoes. I just thought it was so cool, the respect that communicated, because it was like you're respecting their home by like not bringing literal dirt in, but also the fact that everyone doesn't mess with the shoes is also a sort of way of showing respect towards your neighbors' homes, because you're like, I respect that you don't want to bring your dirty shoes into your home, and so I'm going to just leave them untouched in these public, pretty accessible spaces. I feel like a lot of Americans would be afraid to leave their shoes outside their apartment because they would just assume someone would take it. So I thought it was really cool, the sort of community of respect that simple act communicated and created. I hope that makes sense. Basically, it's very interesting to go into an actual home of someone of a very different culture than you, as opposed to just going to like museums. They're very different experiences. The fifth thing, which I'm going to be so happy and sad about, is that the street food culture in Taiwan is amazing. A lot less sketchy than we were told it was in India. Like, I'd be a little bit more worried about the food poisoning prospects in India. There was like street markets where there would just be tons of food stalls, but also there was this one particular food cart that was like just across this big intersection from where we lived, and he made scallion pancakes. This is my absolute favorite food that I have found in Taiwan so far. So it's folded in half, kind of like an omelet, and there's stuff inside. But it's not an omelet, it's a pancake. So it's made of like dough, but it's a scallion pancake because there are scallions in it. So it's a savory pancake experience. And you can get different stuff inside of it. Here I have basil, but I also have cheese and egg that I'm going to eat as well. And I would kill to be able to have one of those scallion pancakes right now. Like, they kept me alive. I had such a hard time with the palate in Taiwan because they use a lot more like nut and seed based flavors, so like peanuts, and I was just like not a fan. This is very strange. I do not love this concept. So I had a hard time like going and just trying a random soup dish because a lot of the time I would just not be into it. So this one guy basically was like a father-son that ran this little food cart and made scallion pancakes, and I saw him every single day. After like the second week when I decided to start doing that, and I discovered him every single day. And it was so nice because he would like know me and be like, I know what you want, and everything, and I loved him, and he was my boy. And I feel like food brings people together, and also this is basically a tribute to my scallion pancake man. I miss him. Yeah. So bonus round time. The pandemic. Basically, as soon as it started to be a thing, people were already starting to like wear masks in public and be sort of aware of it by like the second week of January, I think, maybe the third week of January. I know I have this picture from when I went to a grocery market, like a big street market right before the Chinese New Year. They do these massive street markets where you're supposed to go and like buy all of your food to celebrate for the week because everything's going to be closed. And I actually went with the family that hosted me for the dinner a couple weeks before that, which was also great. They were great. But so when I went to that, I was already questioning, do I need to wear a mask to this big like public area? And I had a mask with me, but when I saw that the people I was meeting with weren't wearing masks, I decided not to, because social pressure is what rules my life. So basically, within like a week after that, almost everyone was wearing masks out in public. All through February, it was like very strange that I wasn't wearing masks, but basically it was like impossible to get them. Especially to get the like proper disposable ones. I actually happened to buy a small pack of masks right when it was starting because I wasn't sure if I needed to wear one to this market, but I ended up saving them to actually wear on my plane trips. It also became a norm in February to take people's temperatures when they were trying to enter buildings. So I went to this session at the National Taiwan University that was coordinated between Minerva and NTU, and they took all of our temperatures on the way in. And I also saw like one of the office buildings next to where we lived was taking everyone's temperature to go to work, and it was very normal. It was like everyone just agreed that if we identified someone with symptoms, they should not be out in public, especially in group spaces where people are going to spend a significant amount of time. Additionally, Taiwan did a really great job of sort of screening people at its borders. So in February, I went on this trip to Malaysia. Check out the video. But at that point, when I came back into Taiwan from Malaysia, they were having everyone fill out this sheet that was like, declare everywhere you've been. Have you been to any China or the few other regions that were kind of China that were affected, and have you had any of the symptoms? And then they actually had individual humans looking at all of those papers to send you onwards before you even went to go through immigration to get your like passport checked. And they were also being very particular about collecting a phone number and the physical address where you would be for everybody entering, which basically meant that they would be able to track more closely like who you had been in contact with if anything happened. Yeah, they just seemed to be taking it so seriously. And then eventually they did close their borders, which is part of why Minerva told everyone to go home in the middle of March. And I think they have like one of the lowest case numbers still. I'm gonna insert some data on how Taiwan's doing, but basically they reacted quickly. They reacted, I think, very strongly. Like Americans would say they overreacted probably. But the numbers speak. And I would have happily been in Taiwan for this whole pandemic if there wasn't like such a chance of me never being able to leave Taiwan. Because being home and being with my parents just feels good for my mental health, even if my physical health would have probably been much better staying in Taiwan. I'm actually planning to do a video getting more into the pandemic and Minerva's specific response to it. That's probably one of the last videos totally just about Minerva that I'm currently planning to do. I'm not saying I'll never talk about Minerva again, but I don't have anything else immediately on my radar. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you think Taiwan is a cool place. I hope you consider going to Taiwan. I personally feel like I need to go back to Taiwan for 2 more months so that I get my full fill, because I feel gypped. So one day I'm taking an extended trip back to Taiwan, especially because I did almost none of the tourist stuff because I was afraid to go to those places because they were very worried about tourists infecting people, especially during February before they shut down. There was even one like cruise ship that docked and infected people in tourist places, so I didn't do any tourist stuff. So I will go back. So thanks for watching. That's it. Go to Taiwan. It's a cool place.